Welcome everyone for joining the seminar tonight. Tonight is HKIA and Hong Kong Architecture Center joint CPD seminar, and it is the second UIA 2017 seminar this time. Today we are very happy to have Mr. Edward Leung joining us for the tour. If you may let me have a short introduction to Mr. Leung. Edward actually is both a practicing architect as well as being academic. Could teach subjects of historical heritage architecture. His experience in conservation design, including the Comics home base in Wan Chai, which is the Maula Street project, the renovation project, and the project actually attend the Hong Kong Arcade Medal of the Year's Award 2014. And he's currently chair of Heritage and Conservation Committees of the Hong Kong Institute of Architects. His recent research focused on Chinese vernacular architectures in the urban context. His research has been presented in conference, just like the UIA Congress last September, in overseas, and also he has presented his conference in mainland China as well as in Hong Kong. So his topic today is about residential marriage, Chinese roof of early colonial architectures of Hong Kong. So may I introduce Mr. Leung?
May I introduce myself to everybody as well? I'm Stephen Ho. I'm the chair of the Board of External Affairs, and also Kelvin. Kelvin is the International Union of Architects Committee of Hong Kong IA chair. So that's why both of us are here
today.
Here today, and one of the reasons why we invite Edward to come to give a talk to us, also to the Hong Kong AC, is because Edward has won the Best Paper Award in the UIA Congress just last September.
Yep. The one and only one, Best Paper Award.
One and only one. So out of the whole world.
Yeah.
Okay. Please.
Okay, thank you.
Edward.
Okay. Is it recording?
Yeah.
Okay. You can hear me? Hello? Oh, that's better. You can hear me. Okay. Today I'm going to present two papers. They are arising from a study that we do for ASD. Basically, they asked us to study Chinese roofs in Hong Kong. So when we think of Chinese roofs in Hong Kong, most of us will think of, okay, to study this Chinese roof in Hong Kong, simple. You just go to new territories and get all the village houses and research them. But that is not true. Chinese roofs in Hong Kong spans over a lot of different buildings. So we started off with trying to look at, first of all, we tried to look at how many types of buildings in Hong Kong do have Chinese roofs. And then we find that there's no end to it. Then we reverse our question, saying that why would anybody build a Chinese roof in Hong Kong? Okay? So that is, through my years of research, as the chair says, these years I focus a lot on researches on vernacular architectures and academic areas of heritage architectures in Hong Kong. I tend to look at things not from, most people would look at heritage buildings, look at the building and look at the characters, which is not ideal. I don't do that sort of things. I take it from a perspective of an architect. An architect would think, what circumstances do I have to design a building? Okay, from a design architect point of view. So I would, before I look at a building, I would say, if I were a craftsman or a master builder 100 years ago, given this brief, given this use, given this limitation of material, given this circumstances, what would I build? And what I end up with a piece of paper with some material building is similar to what is end up there. What you see there are the CDE. That's how I look at it. I never go to a building and look, these are the CDE. That's the wrong way to look at architecture, right? The way we architects look at it is to start from design and look at the circumstances behind it. So when I look at it, why would anybody build a Chinese roofs in Hong Kong in the historical times? And then I started to think about what users and what clients and what circumstances gives me to do this. And there I come up with basically two main branches. One is Chinese building. The other is variant buildings. I don't call it Western buildings, but variant buildings. Chinese buildings would have all these maybe very ancient Chinese, maybe more modern Chinese, or some later rebuilding of settlement houses, settlement villages, still in the Chinese character, but not ancient architecture. Still use Chinese roofs. So that's one category. And there are something like Tonglao, okay? I don't know whether that's called Chinese building or Western buildings, but I call it Chinese blocks, okay? And they are Western buildings or variant buildings, which are basically not designed in a Chinese form, but in a modern form or a Western form. Maybe colonial buildings, or maybe concrete building which try to look like Chinese, but actually that is not a Chinese building. What we normally call Chinese Renaissance. We have a term called Chinese Renaissance, but China don't use that. So China will call it eclectic architecture. Okay, these are what I call variant architectures, and sometimes they don't deliberately use Western style, but they just happen to have a utilitarian function, and some Westerners build it, but they use Chinese roofs. So these are the main categories I have. So in the UIA conference, I presented part of it, which is what happens when Western buildings have Chinese roofs. That is narrowly down to when you have colonial buildings with Chinese roofs. And then I have the second part of this presentation is another presentation I presented in Tianjin just a month ago to a predominantly China audience of talking about Lingnan architectures, traditional Chinese architectures in Hong Kong, using a little bit different from mainland China techniques of using Chinese roofs. So it is divided into two. Hopefully I can finish the first presentation in half an hour and then have a short break and then start another one. As usual in a conference, they would usually give me a very little time, 15 minutes, and go through all the things. But today, luckily, I can drag on a bit so that we can have a more in-depth understanding. So please do not hesitate to raise your hands, and if you want to look at something more carefully, please do. So, Chinese roof on Western buildings. So why would anybody do something like that? Okay. So they are Victorian buildings, Western buildings. But how significant is the Victorian building built in Hong Kong? Is it different from the Victorian buildings built in Victoria, in England at the same time? Okay. Obviously, there are a lot of difference. But one of the main difference that I observed these years is the Chinese roofs. For this building, it's obviously a Western classical building. But look at what it is. It's just got a Chinese roofs on it. So why would anybody do something like that? And how did they come up with this? Does a Western architect design it, or Chinese craftsmen do this? Or how they integrate the two techniques together? And what are the problems there? As I come across more, yes?
Can you define what's Chinese roof?
I am coming to that. Oh. I will come to that. Chinese roof. Okay, I'll jump to that. Okay, no, that will be the next slide. Okay, so when I come across more projects, these are some of the projects that I come across repairing. And look at this, the end tiles sagging. Okay, it doesn't happen on Chinese building, it doesn't happen on Western building, but it happens in Hong Kong a lot, over and over again. Parapet wall, tiles clashing into it, no flashing. I wouldn't do it in England. Yes.
Isn't the point that in British architecture, they're only interested in the facades, the roofscape is really not so important.
That is a very good point. That is a very good point.
The roofscape is all important. That is the central difference.
I will come to the different categories. What you said is 1/4 of the question. Okay, I will categorize what Western architecture or Western buildings, when did they look at the roof, when did they don't look at the roof, when they don't look at the roof, what happens? Okay, when they look at the look of the roof or the shape of the roof, or they look at the techniques of the roof. Okay, so as I said in the beginning, I don't look at building at features. Okay, that is the layman way of doing it. The layman will bring you to a Hong Kong architecture center tour and look at, oh, this building, blah, 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 blah. I never look at buildings like that. I look at it, what happens if I were the architect 100 years ago? Okay, that's how I look at things. So coming back to this, very messy tiles. Okay, what happens here? Tiles are laid on top of tiles with lime mortar, just putting all together. This doesn't happen to Chinese roof. That doesn't happen to Western roof. Why the hell does it happen here? Why? Another one, slipping down. Okay, it shouldn't happen to Chinese roof. It shouldn't happen to Western roof. Why does it happen here? I'm not talking about one case. All of them have similar problems. Cut tiles in gutters, right? And these are, when they cut the Chinese tiles like this, leakage problem, because they are irregular shape. Sagging on the roofs, okay? And this just lime mortar on without any flashing. You know, in Western architecture, we would put a bonnet tile, or a bonnet flashing on top of it. It doesn't happen here, okay? And they sag. Also, the structure has got problem, okay? Because the span does not match the necessary structure. I'm not talking about one building. Time and over again, this happens. So I want to see, is there a rule to it? Okay, if we have to accept Hong Kong has these sort of things, why would some people do that? Right? Can we think of some way to resolve it? Okay, first of all, then we come to Payman's question. What defines a Chinese roof? Particularly, I want to narrow it down because Chinese roof is such a gigantic topic. It will take me 10 years to do it. I will narrow it down to Lingnan roof. Lingnan being in the southeast coastal region of China, where Hong Kong and Guangdong province and Guangxi province and Fujian provinces. Okay, what tiles do we use? Okay, I don't want to talk about North China tiles. That's a different story. So, how do we, Hong Kong in particular, 100 years ago, integrate Chinese roof with Western building? How do we do it? Then, when we face with these things, what are the problems is, and do we have a good conservation techniques to deal with these things? Okay, Lingnan roofs, according to Professor Tong Gao Hwa, he cited 5 characteristics of Lingnan roof, okay, which is very particular. One is that we are water shedding. We only need the tiles to, okay, come back to what defines Chinese roof. Chinese roof is defined as, obviously used by Chinese, but the way we do it is a modular, concave and convex tiles, small unit, very typical units, no special, very few special typical units. That's how we do it. No matter in North China or South China or Eastern China or Western China, we use concave and convex tiles and interplay with it. This is from the scholarly studies of many scholars saying that the common characteristics is convex, concave tiles. Okay, Western tiles do have typical tiles, but Western tiles do have a lot of non-standard ones which are used widely. Have a lot of bonnet tiles, have a lot of ridge tiles, have a lot of cap tiles, eave tile, parapet tiles, have a lot of those things, have a lot of flashings. But Chinese tiles predominantly try to use one or two shapes and try to interplay it as many times as possible. Okay, and traditionally Chinese done it very successfully. Okay, and in Lingnan, what we do is that, okay, I'll explain the construction of it in a minute, but let me come to the 5 characteristics of Lingnan. Lingnan is an area in southeast China coastal area, and the characteristic is that we're hot, we're in the subtropical area, we're wet, we have typhoons, okay, and humid, and all these sort of things, okay. So what a roof needs to be is water shedding, but we don't need to fully seal it. That is the reason for it. So that the water, so what it needs is the tiles only needs to be loosely laid, so that it finds a path that when it drips down, it drips downward. Water always go downward unless driven by driving rain. So what the traditional craftsmen do is that find a way that it goes down and in a shelter from the wind. If it tries to go down and the wind drives it up, it doesn't work. So it tries to find a way in between the tiles so that it drifts down without being driven up by the wind. So that's the way most Lingnan tiles works. And that's why we have double layer tiles. Okay? And it doesn't need to be fully sealed. North China would seal the tiles, would use mortar to seal the tiles. But that's not the way we do it, okay? Because we need ventilation. It's more important to ventilate, okay? Because we are humid, and even if it doesn't rain, people will respirate. So it needs to be anti-moisture with ventilated gaps. And it needs a gap in between, which is quite clever. It needs to be wind resistance, because we've got typhoons, okay? Coastal areas particularly bad, which means Hong Kong, Macau, coastal Guangdong, and coastal Fujian particularly bad. Further inland, slightly better. North Guangdong, Western Fujian, slightly better. Guangxi, slightly better, but still it's got wind. Okay, so they've got to find a way of fixing it, but not by gluing it down, because we don't want to seal it. So we have got something called PACs, which I will explain in a minute. Heat disperse. Okay. Yes.
Well, presumably, gutters are not part of the construction, because
Chinese buildings do not have gutters.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. I'll try to explain why the hell that drives a hell of a problem to these kind of things.
Proud of them.
Exactly. That is what problems if you try to integrate a Western building with a Chinese roof. Chinese roof always overhangs. And if the hell you try to integrate that with a Western building, with a facade, with a parapet, the hell you've got a problem. Okay? That is the problem. Presumably architects 100 years ago, Western architects 100 years ago didn't come to, haven't got your intelligence, right? Okay, heat disperse, as we said, is important. So North China roof would use beddings, would use hay, and lime mortar to bed all the tiles together, right? But we don't do that sort of things because it's trap all the heat. What we need is that the gaps we need to ventilate. So we can't use bedding, lime to bed it. Easy repair because it's too expensive to repair, and then so we need them to be loosely laid. Okay, with some parts of it break, fine, throw it away and do it again. Okay, so what Chinese roofs does in Lingnan is something like that. These are called battens. In northern China, okay, this row, I don't know whether you can see it, but I can't lift it up. Okay, this is the purlin. The horizontal one, these are what we call purlins, right? For horizontal one, just like Western architecture, we call them purlins. Okay, and these sloping ones are battens. Okay, and these sloping ones are battens battens are the one immediately below the tiles. So the one, if there is anything that rots, leaks, and the timber rots, the first thing to rot is not the berlin, it's the batten. So obviously the berlins are big, so they're expensive. So you don't want them to rot every couple of years. But the batten, you want them to be as thin, as cheap, and as small as possible. Because if it rots, then throw it away and do it again. You don't want this one to be thick and big and expensive, right? Because it will be very expensive to repair. So this needs to be very cheap, okay? So as thin as possible. So what it means is that the span cannot be very wide because it's thin, okay? And it needs to be, and they will need to be closely packed together. The closely put together is determined by the width of the tiles. You can't have a too big tiles because it's too heavy to use. As I said, it must be easy to handle. So they are close together, and a lot of them, and you want them to be as small and as cheap as possible. That's what these things are like. So we have battens, very thin ones, and you put the tiles on top of this. And the tiles, we call it 7-7-3, exposed 30%, cover 70%. That's how Lingnan roofs use. So we cover 70% and expose 30%. Very often we find cheeky craftsmen try to save money and do it 50-50. 70-30, make sure that it is always 3 layers in any section. Okay, if 50-50, you'll have a problem. Okay, because it's somewhere you'll get into it. Okay, so this is important, and the tiles are like that. Okay, I'll explain in a moment why it is this shape. Modern tiles, okay, traditionally tiles are made with something like that. They make a barrel out of it. Like, who of you have played ceramics before? Ceramics, okay. I used to play ceramics, okay. And this is something like a ceramic crafts. They make something like that. That is why it's slightly beveled, okay. And the mold has got grooves in between. So once you do it, actually it should be 4 in a row, and comes out with a slight barrel like that. Come up with that, you give it a slight knock, and then it breaks into 4. Okay, so that is why traditional tiles look like something like that. It's not parallel. Okay, the beauty of that. Oh, I've lost one toy. Give me a minute. I've got some toys, but I've got a real one. I've got a real one as well. Sorry. Okay. This is called a butt. Okay, this is called a butt, which is packed on here. That's the real size of it. You want to play with it? But I've got a little toy here. Okay, which what it does is that because it's beveled, you can put it there, and it just clicks onto 2 and doesn't come down. Clever, isn't it? So it doesn't slip down because of this pad. That's how it does that. But unfortunately nowadays most of the manufacturers just roll it along and cut. That is why it doesn't work nowadays. That is why modern tiles slip and traditional tiles does not slip. That's the reason. If you If you choose the wrong tile, why does it slip and the traditional craftsman does not? What is wrong? Because the tiles is made differently. Okay, so that is a lesson to learn for we architects who do historical architecture. The slight things that you don't learn will make you wrong. Okay? Because we never learned the things 100 years ago. Okay, we don't live like that. And the manufacturer will give you porcupines. They will just give you one. That's the one that we use. Oh, every architect uses it. Please buy it. And then you'll find it doesn't work. Okay? That's one of the reasons. So we use that sort of things. And after doing that, what do we do? Okay, there's packs onto them, and the packs onto that. And then we use roll tiles and cover it. Roll tiles cover it like that. Okay? Roll tiles are covered like that. Again, how is it made? Like that. Okay? With two rows like that, made it, and knock it, and becomes two. So a lot of manufacturers will just do that and give it a nip and cut a nip on it. And the manufacturer will give you like that. But it doesn't work. Look at the trick. Traditionally, it is made out of a mold, not from a manufacturing line. What does this thing do? Remember the toy I gave you? It clicks onto that. That prevents it from falling. So if a modern manufacturer gives you one without the click, that is the reason why your roof slips. So there are a lot of tricks that if we don't learn the traditional way, we can never build it. Okay, I'm digressing a lot because I'm supposed to be comparing the two systems. But what I'm saying is that the purlins will go that way, the battens closely packed together, the battens are thin, and it's got these packs and roll tiles to cover it. Okay?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I was just very interested to know what wood are they actually using for purlins and the battens?
Wood. Okay, but obviously
does it matter what type of wood?
Obviously, the purlin will be better wood. Traditionally, northern China would use bigger purlins, but for vernacular architectures in Lingnan, we use Walam Chinese fir. We call it Chinese fir, but actually biologically it's not a fir. But we call it Walam Tam. It takes 20 years, 18 to 20 years to grow a one that is around 12 meters long. And the diameter is between 130 to 200, something like that. So the beauty of it is it's always straight. So the traditional forester will cut it, and in the middle, because it's 12 meters high, you cut it, and it ends up probably 4 to 6 meters long with the best middle part. That is why all Chinese purlins that you find in Hong Kong or Lingnan are all like that, with one end bigger, one end smaller. The smaller end probably 130 to 150. The bigger end probably 150 to 180. And the span is never more than 6 meters, but more likely to 4 to 5 meters. That is why Chinese buildings are always 4 to 5 meters span. It's because of the tree.
But apart from the length of the timber, do they have preservative qualities as well, or is that not a
that is another story. Yes, they use Tong Yao and other things. Okay, but that's digressing a lot. I'm talking about. Okay, I will have some other opportunities to talk about it. But look at Western tiles. Okay, I practice in England, and I used to do slate tiles in Welsh slate tiles or Spanish slate tiles. What do they look like? The rafters go in that direction. Okay, the rafters are deep, like that. Okay, because they need to span very far away purlins. So it's very different. Chinese purlins are close together, and Western purlins are very far apart. That's why they need a very deep rafter. And then, because of the deep rafter, you can have a very thin batten. But remember, the western batten are that way. Okay? And because the western batten are that way, you hang the tiles like that. And obviously, lapping, okay? Obviously, overlapping. I don't have that many hands, but you can imagine what it's like. Okay, overlaps like that.
Sorry.
So so the reasoning being, so you can see how it end up. The rafter being very deep, battens as again same. Western apartment are same. Battens are easier to rot. So whatever easy to rot, you make it cheapest, smallest, thinnest. Okay, and then you nail the tiles through it. And then because they nail it through like that and hang it. That's why you can have a very steep roof. Lingnan roof is never steep. It's always very gentle. Any steeper than that, it will slip. Okay, it has got something like that to hold it at 20 or 30. How many degrees? 應該幾多度啊？ 25 degrees or something like that. Okay, any steeper than that, that is danger. Okay, for western roof it doesn't matter because they hang it. So these are two different kinds of philosophy. But imagine if you have a western roof and try to fit this one on. I'll show you how done. These are western rafter. How do you put these things on? It's not close enough. Okay, put them closer together, right? But that is expensive because these things are expensive. And what else can you do? Have thinner ones? No, they can't span the distance between the purlins. So you can never win. With the western rafter, you almost cannot put a Chinese tile on. But that's exactly what the craftsmen did to all Ponglong buildings 100 years ago. So how did they do it? As I said, Chinese roofs are something like that. Purlins, very close together purlins, and very small, thin battens, and do this in very gentle roof. Okay, something like that. And the purlins are probably 400 or something apart, and because of the length of the tree, you can probably span 4 or 5 meters. The reason being why we do things like that is because all Chinese buildings enter on this side. Okay, Chinese buildings will always enter on this side, on the eaves. Western building, you always enter on the gable side. That is why on the Chinese building, this does not matter. You can have as many wings as possible. Western buildings, you need that width because you face front. Chinese building doesn't matter even if you have a lot of columns in between because it doesn't obstruct you, right? So Western buildings would have a very strong truss, which are able to put very deep purlins and have very deep rafters in exchange for very small battens. And that is why Western buildings could do. Oh, I haven't got that drawing, but I'm trying. Oh, okay, this drawing is trying to put Chinese tiles onto there with very closely packed rafters. Obviously, that is expensive, right? I missed one drawing in between, which I've drawn, but I didn't show it. It's with rafters apart and all Western buildings, which was the slide before. Okay, something like that. Okay, something like that. I've drawn it as well, but I didn't show it. Okay, so you can see the inherent problems of all these things of how to when they try to integrate the two things together. But how does it happen? I want to step back a bit. How does it happen? I don't know. Okay, when does it happen? I don't know. Because the fact that I don't know is a good piece of information. Nobody ever writes about it. Okay, the more I research on it, nobody ever talks about it. Okay, there are some in Xiamen, okay, that are traditional like that, very beautifully designed, like you said, very beautifully designed facade, but the roof is almost non-existent. You can't see it. Okay, this one I can see it from another building above, and it's setback. Okay, the only piece of information I see is from the book from Colonial, and he managed to find the specification for this church, dated 1846. It says double layer single tile adhered by lime mortar. That is obviously Chinese double layer tile. If he would have wanted Western tile, you would never write something like that, right? That is not a Western tile specification. So it must be 相同相雅, okay? Although it's so simple. But there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words in the entire document. This document very elaborate on the windows and all the materials. Only 8 words about the roof. Amazing, isn't it? What does it tell us? It only tells that the roof construction, the roof shape is important, but the roof construction is not a major concern of the architect. And it also means that by writing like that, people know how to do it. Okay? The lesser your specification, that means the lesser you need to specify it, because everybody will know it, right? That's how we architects do it, right? Okay? We don't write certain things because you know that even if I don't write it, you will build like that. Come on. You know, that sort of attitude. 我哋 architect 咁做嘢㗎啦。佢哋係咪都咁做啦？佢落界咁啊，使乜寫咁詳細啦？係咪？ We would do something like that. So it would mean that everybody were doing something like that, and it would a very typical Lingnan double layer tiles. Okay, got that? Okay, so I come to a stop on the history. So I try to look at it. What if I were a builder at that time? What would I do? Okay, so instead of looking at the style of what style building or whatever, I reverse it. What circumstances would I build what kind of thing? What circumstances would drive me as a builder to build a Chinese roof on a Western building? I think of 4 reasons. Okay, one is symbolic, one is serviceability, one is stylistic, one is subsidiary. And I'll come to that one by one. Symbolic. Symbolic not by style, but by shape. If you have a church, then it is important to have a nave and aisles and externally have a pitch roof. Okay? Even later, you build with concrete, you still want a pitch roof. Somehow with a church, somehow you would want a pitch roof on externally and internally. Right? That is the reason. Disregard the style. Okay? You can have it classical, like the First Church of Christ. You can have it Gothic, like some other churches. You can have it vernacular. Doesn't matter. Always have a pitch roof on the outside and on the inside. So when you do that, so I'm focusing on only tiles which are important. There are later, by the 1920s, people begin to use concrete, like Gaoyan Church in 3rd Street, right? 2nd Street, okay. So concrete roof with tiles, okay. And there are other churches like that. But I'm focusing on timber ones. As I already said, the problem to solve timber truss and Chinese tiles is the spacing of rafters and purlins. So this one, what they opted for is very deep rafter, very closely packed together, so that the purlins could be done as if a Western truss is. That looks like a Western truss, but the rafters are very deep. That is an expensive way of doing it. Okay, maybe they were the Rosary Parish Church was rich. Okay, so that's how they do it. This another one is the First Church of Christ Scientists, also very deep ones. Another example is Colonial Church, which use very closely packed together purlins. I think this one more resembles Chinese purlins. And then this, and very flat and wide battens. This one, from there onward, it looks like a Chinese roof. But still with the Western thrust. So you can see different ways of doing it, but I can see it's always a compromise. You can never do a Western roof. You either have to pay for deeper purlins, more purlins, or you pay for deeper rafters. There's no alternative, no in between. Okay? The few cases that I see with not very deep trusses and not a lot of purlins always set. Okay, that's the problem. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's it. Okay, the second reason why I would do something like that, why I would build something like that, are utilitarian roofs. Some of them are purely utilitarian. Yes, you may have a facade, but when you have a utilitarian building, you don't particularly concerned about the facade, or you don't need a particularly beautiful interior roofs. But the pitch roof, Chinese pitch roof, is just for convenience. It's too difficult to make a flat roof, and it's impossible to have a Western slate tile roof because you don't ship wave slate to Hong Kong. Okay, so a roof like that. But then, since it's utilitarian, you don't think about the eaves too much, and then you just have a cornice eaves, and that's exactly where the problem is. They always overflow, because probably in England, where I come from, it's always drizzling for 360 days per year, but it never torrential rain. But it is a norm in Hong Kong. Okay, so when you have gutters that look like that, you are asking for trouble, Mr. Architect. Okay, so they are always like that. Okay, and sometimes they have gutters which makes matter worse. This gutter can never hold the water in a typhoon or black rain. Come on. Okay, so how do people deal with it? Okay, the way that the ASD have done in the post office was that they relay the roof with a very deep flashing. Okay, so when next time you go into the post office, you look out, you can see a flashing about a meter deep. Okay, which solves the leakage into the building problem. It doesn't leak now. Okay, I've never heard of it leaks, but it doesn't look nice. You look out and you see the flashing inside and covering. Okay, imagine you see a beautiful tiled roof and a very deep flashing, right? And it also doesn't solve the water overflow problem. You can see a lot of black lines here. You still can't solve it. Okay, this one I'm trying to deal with this one now. Okay, I'm helping the medical museum to deal with their buildings, and I'm facing exactly that. Okay, parapet, gutter, all the rest of it. Because at that time, someone designed a nice cornice with a very small cornice gutter. No way it can cater for the water of Hong Kong. Okay, if it's flush, then it goes back in between the tiles into the building. So even if you do it nicely with a deep flashing, it still doesn't solve the dripping down the wall problem. The third type is more stylistic. So there are occasionally architects who pays a lot of attention to the style of the roof, which I call art and craft movement architecture. Art and craft movement is a style that lived very shortly in England. Okay, in the late 19th century to by the 1910, it was overtaken by Art Deco and the modern movement. Anyway, it was a very short-lived in between the Gothic revival and the modernism that the art and craft movement took place, and they indeed produced a number of very good architecture. For those of you who studied Western architecture, you know art and craft movement emphasized the traditional English handcraft, building crafts, like making very good well slide tiles, making very good hand hammered flashing, very good hand cast gutters, and all these sort of things. The hell it can be done in Hong Kong, I can tell you. Okay, so when someone tried to import this style into Hong Kong and find that they can't use whale tile and had to use Chinese Chinese double pan, double roll. They are asking for problems. Okay, so I see problems over and over again, clashing tiles with this thing, particularly when it is sloping. Imagine it is easy to cut this tile 45 degrees. How do you do this? How do you do this? Not possible, I can tell you. Okay, that is exactly what happens to these areas. When you have 45 degrees cutting into a roof, these places, 100 times I see it, 100 times it is. Okay, so furthermore, it's got all this. They deliberately truncate all the eaves just to give it a picturesque eaves. Okay, so got a lot of problems. If you have continuous eaves, that's fine. The gutter flows away. But if you have truncated every time and change the level every time, you're asking for trouble. And chimneys have got a lot of junctions. Also, you need to expose a very nice roof truss on the inside. So again, the same problem. It's better. Some of them are, most of them, better because they have overhanging, deep overhangs. So even if it overloads, it overloads. Okay, but it's still not nice. Okay, so these are a number of these common problems I see in this type of buildings. So I dealt with two buildings. That's the one that's not I dealt with, but I looked at it. Again, you can see the issues here. This one is done by lime mortar. Okay, these are very funny junctions. A very long gutter. When it rains, I can tell the water will just flow down. Okay, so a lot of junctions, a lot of tricky junctions. This one, cutting 45 degrees, repeated problems. Okay. Yes.
Do you classify these buildings like Gothic churches and these arts and crafts buildings as colonial style? Because I think a colonial style, I think of like more.
Yeah, you could.
A particular kind of classical.
You could.
But
Tony, how do you define colonial style?
It's a very broad classification, but generally it's an adaptation of the local climate. So there's some modification on it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you could call it colonial style. Just that personally I don't use that term a lot, but except to simplify it, to let people understand. But because it's too difficult to define it. Okay, so yeah. Okay, as I've already explained it. So because colonial style is a style, but it's not strictly a style. It is a method of doing things in the colonial areas which combines a transport of styles from the Western mother countries to a colony with a lot of adaptations. And sometimes not pure style, as if it were. Sometimes it makes a number of styles together, which you would never do such sort of things in England. Okay, so it's hard to say colonial style is a style, I would say. Okay, anyway, another type, the fourth type is subsidiary type. I call it subsidiary. I try to use the 4S to make it more fun. Okay. Okay. This type of roof is that it's got an imposing facade. The facade is more important. So the Chinese roof, it will form the exterior form. It will help to compose the exterior form, but it's not a predominant aesthetic feature, right? The form is there, but not the detail of it. Okay, so usually it will set back because it will have a very promising cornice line. It will set back, not to distract from it, and it has got usually a fairly simple roof, and because it's got setback roof, so even if it leaks, and it leaks, so what the hell? Okay, so it will leak on the roof, okay, but not the that it will cause major danger. and because it doesn't have a lot of inherent heritage features on it, so even if you repair it to the for the purpose of making it waterproof, even if you change the detail a little bit, I don't think it matters too much. The junction of the roof is probably not the CPE, right? That's the way I look at it. So I cover all these 4 kinds of roofs. So I come to a case studies, which I, together with a number of partners, including Betty, we deal with this roof, Colonial Green Bowling Club. It has got a truss, which was built in 1926, and it's been altered a number of times. And then the truss has been altered a number of times, the building has been altered a number of times, but the main trusses are still intact, and the main roofs are still intact. But obviously the roof's tiles have been changed a number of times, and it sags and it leaks and it overflows, all the sort of common problems we see, okay? And as I said, it sags, that means that it has all these steel things propping it up. The gutter never works, okay, because it will overflow in the heavy rain of Hong Kong. But the gutter is important. I can't get rid of the gutter because the gutter is an important feature in art and craft movement architecture. The black line and the black vertical pipes are important features. And obviously cracks. And as I said, the art and craft movement juxtaposition of white vertical line planes to the pitch roof. So it's got a lot of these junctions which the Chinese style can never deal with. Okay, and it also sets at the edge because it used to have some galo brackets, and when it comes to the edge, when it's got altered, someone just cut away the galo bracket, and the Chinese pattern can never overhang. Okay, it's as easy for a Western rafter to overhang, but it's impossible for a Chinese pattern to overhang because it's too thin. So unless you've got some solutions at the overhanging reefs, you can never deal with it. Okay, so these are the problems we were faced with, and so we devised some sort of solutions for it. We use modern packs, modern stainless steel packs, to hook it together in between the 2 tiles. The beauty of it is that the beauty of Hong Kong is that we always have double pan, double row tiles. That means you can hide a lot of things in between which cannot be seen from above and cannot be seen from below. We add steel wire, copper wires in between to hang this together. We make sure that the in between it ventilates, which is an important feature. As I said in the beginning, Chinese mainland roof must ventilate because of our climate. And then this one is funny. It is not a thin pattern. It's not a deep rafter. It's in between. So the purlins are slightly closer together, but not as close as a Chinese roof. And then the patterns are thicker than a Chinese pattern, but not as thick as a rafter. So it's in between these 2 styles. And then we have to redo all these flashings. As I said, one of the major problem is when it crosses over a brick wall. Okay, Chinese roof never needs to eaves never need to cross over a brick wall because there's always a purlin and overhangs. But when you come to a Western building with a brick wall is important to a Western building. When you come over to that, most cases that I find, the traditional Chinese craftsmen couldn't deal with how a rafter could bridge over the top of a brick wall. They could never do the way that I do it in England with a bedding piece. So with the very thin Chinese patterns, they don't know how to deal with that part. The most usual case is that they put a lot of lime mortar onto it and bed the whole thing. And that is where all the problems is. As I said, if your gutter is not deep enough, and the gutter collects water, and it overflows, it would just go through this lime mortar and go inside the building. As usual, what else do you expect? So what we do is that we must be sure that we have a new LED flashing underneath it, and not just any length. It must oversail the depth of a brick wall. That's a must. And also have a gap in between so that any water that sits on will stay there. If you have the mortar that goes over, it will just still go over. Okay, so it's important to leave small gaps. Okay, so these are important things to deal with. This is Betty. This is my wife Jiang Hong, and they try to lay the tiles themselves. So we have a very good craftsman who teaches us how to lay the tiles. As you can see, they use we use modern stainless steel packs, okay, to do this. And we need to deal with a lot of. Anybody knows me know that I like to hand draw all my details. Deal with the corners. Deal with the gutters. The gutters are never enough, so you have to think of a good way of leading the water away from the building. At the parapets, the usual Chinese way was to use lime mortar to just cement it together, but that's always a problem. So we need to use flashing. And for flashing, because of the Chinese tiles are curved, it's not a Western slate, wave slate tiles, which you can use a very flat flashing. The Chinese curved tiles makes flashing very difficult. So we need to be very careful about this detail. If for a project with money like this one, I will use soaker tiles and not a single layer tiles. Okay, so this one, as I said, it's important that this part to the parapet is LED flash. Important that you have a proper drainage because it goes on the flat roof. These are the problems. Then when you have to cut a Chinese tile 45 degrees, you need this one is always a problem. So that's why you need a flashing across the bottom, because Chinese tiles do not have bonded tiles. Okay, and overhanging, you need to strengthen the galo bracket. Okay, these are some of the tricks that we need to do. There are other cases, other projects. This one I didn't do it, which is a very good project. Old High Court building by AST, which is a very good project. Also double layer tiles, also using modern packs to do it, and modern waterproofing. This one, old typo police stations, also relaying the tiles with modern packs. This one I did, Comics Home Space, row house, which I used modern structure and modern screws, modern waterproofing, and modern insulation to do it. So there are a number of ways to do it. None of them are the final solutions, but as long as we know the principle of what the problems are, we can deal with these things because we are architects. We don't need to be constrained by the past problem. So the moral of the story is that what has been done in history is not always right. Okay, but you need to think of why they did certain things under what circumstances and think of an innovative way to deal with these sort of problems. So ahead mission, we need to do more studies and understand, you have to understand both Western architecture and Chinese architecture. Okay? With just one knowledge, you can never deal with this kind of group. Carry out more researchers, and if for colleagues, architects, restorers, or conservationists who have done these sort of things, collect these things from HKIA, HKIA-HKAC, collect all these things, and don't be shy on sharing knowledges. We're very accustomed to hide all our knowledge under the table so that only I can use it. But I advocate we all to share our knowledge so that we gain more knowledge of dealing with this unique piece of techniques which is not found anywhere else, so that we can move forward and repair better buildings and do better conservation. Thank you. doing on time? How I'm doing on time? I've overrun. Obviously.
Half an hour.
Okay, but I can do. Okay, if you don't need a break, I will go on to the next one. Because I did a lot of introduction and background on this one, so the next one will be faster. Yes.
Do you have any research on the how on other Chinese city with a similar case?
No. I went to Tianjin. I went to Wuhan. Other treaty ports with Western buildings. Most of them would use Western tiles. Not all of them would use. Some of them would use real slate tiles. What the hell? How did they do it? A lot of them would use profile clay tiles, Western tiles. Only from my experience, I don't know, only in Guangzhou, Guangdong province, South Guangdong province, Macau, and Hong Kong would Western buildings would be covered with a Ningnan double tile, double layer roof. That's the only place I find. Even in Fujian, I don't see this sort of. Why? I don't know.
So it's not about the finance problem, because we used
know.
to explain that because of the cost.
I don't know. It's probably because of convenience. I would say even the church where we say, oh, I write one, and then the craftsman will tell him that this is fine, it's perfect, it's good. You know, we can deal with it, and it looks nice, and it doesn't compromise your architecture. It fits perfectly with your architecture, and they will do it. That's how I imagine it, but I cannot prove it. I kept doing it, but I can't find any
Then we
document
have to
of
go
it.
to Singapore to see.
Yeah, good. Okay, anything else? If not, then I will go on to the next presentation, right? So this one is about Chinese roofs, okay, for the vernacular roofs. Okay, they are in Chinese architecture. We have got magistral architecture and vernacular architecture. Okay, 中國建築分兩類，一種叫官式建築，一種叫民間建築。So this one is called vernacular architecture. Vernacular architecture not necessarily built by the poor people. It can be built by rich people. Just that the building of it is not under a imperial decree to do it. Okay, so all these sort of things that they would do it. Vernacular architecture is actually a very wide topic in Chinese architecture. You take 30 years to learn vernacular architecture because there's so many different kinds of it. But I like to narrow it down to whatever applicable to Hong Kong. Okay, so applicable to Hong Kong is 3 types: the Guangfu type, the Hakka type, and the Chouchou types. Okay, so the theory, the theoretical base behind it is that the roof shape and the roof materials are very unique to Chinese vernacular architecture, and they represent the different climate, location, and peoples. So see if we can, from different peoples, we devise how they would do different roofs, and what are the characteristics of it. And what do we find in Hong Kong? And do they have problems now? And if they have a problem now, how do we as architects or restorer or conservationists deal with these sort of special cases? Okay, so the theoretical base is from my wife's teacher, Professor Lu Yunling. He says that vernacular architecture is best expressed in Minxi. Okay, Minxi is a difficult word to translate. Many scholars would translate it as sub-ethnic group. I don't like this term because ethnicity carries too heavy an 18th century anthropological burden. Which carries all this connotation of race, blood, people's expression, and that sort of things. It's too heavy. I can't find a better translation at the moment, although I know that a lot of people would call it sub-ethnicity, but I would still use it Minxi or communities. please excuse me for using this term. If you see another translation, it's not because I don't know, because I prefer not to use those other terms. Okay. So in Hong Kong, there will be 3 types of communities, which is Guangfu, Hakka, and Qiujiao. Okay. So first of all, I explain what these peoples are and what type of architectures are, and I will explain them one by one, and then I will explain the characters and how to repair them. First of all, in Lingnan area, this is the Lingnan area. Why is it called Lingnan? It's called south of the ranges, south of the 5 ranges in Ling. Okay, it's 5 ranges which right cut across the west of Fujian province, north of Guangdong, and north of Guangxi province, south of Jiangxi province, south of Hunan province. It just cuts it through there. It stops the northern cold weather from entering the south. It also catches the southern coastal humid typhoons and air and rain to these areas. Also, it cuts off all the river. All the rivers north of the ranges go into Yangtze River. 五嶺以北嘅所有河都入長江嘅，每一條都入長江。五嶺以北嘅全部落大海。South of the 5 ranges, all the rivers go into South China Seas. What does it mean? That means people, traditional people, are very difficult to cross a very high range. Wuyisan is around 2,800 meters MPD, so it's very difficult to cross. Okay, so all the rivers go back to us. That means the people, farmers in Guangxi and Hunan would trade with all the peoples or townships along the Yangtze River. People here cannot trade with the Yangtze River. As simple as that. How can you carry a lot of heavy things and climb the mountain? You can't do it, right? So has to go over there, and who do they trade with? Indochina, Taiwan, Japan, Korea. That's how, or Holland and England, so later. So Lingnan peoples have always been have a wet climate and humid climate, and more used to communicating with the Western world and the outside world. That is the reason. Okay. China has got by linguistics, we've got 7 dialects. 北吳湘贛粵閩客. Okay, 7 dialects, and in the Lingnan area we've got Yu, which is Guangfu, Hakka, and Min, Manan, or Fujian, which is the which Qiujiao is part of the Min dialect, which is those are the 3 main dialects we hear in Hong Kong. So we'll focus on that. All the vernacular studies of Hong Kong I've been doing are focused on these 3 communities, broadly these 3 communities. They come to Hong Kong at different times. The Guangfu people have been here the longest, so they occupy mostly the fertile plains in Yanglong and Sha-Tin and Tai Po. The later comers, Hakka people, came after the evacuation order in Qing Dynasty, so they only could occupy the hilly areas. That's why the Hakka peoples always have walled villages, because they have got to defend themselves against the hostile locals. And the Qiujiao people, which is part of the Min dialect people, they will come mostly. Some of them come after the fall of the Qing dynasties in the early Republican areas, which is the 1910s or 1920s. A lot of them come after the changing of political hands in China in 1949. So a lot of Qiujiao people would come here in the 1950s. So they will come to the urban areas. That's why different peoples occupy different zones of Hong Kong. Okay, so these are 3 different types. A lot of, as I said, the Guangfu people occupy the plains, so they have stable large clans, so they would build a lot of ancestral halls. So they are mostly characterized by this ancestral halls. The Hakka people, they have a lot of walled villages because they have got to defend themselves from the hostile locals. So a lot of them built in compound houses. Okay. The Chiljiao people come in the 1950s to the urban areas, so they no longer need the ancestral hall. They no longer need the defensive houses, but they will instead build a lot of temples. So these are the different types of buildings in Hong Kong that we can find. It may not be the same case in China, right? But this is a phenomenon of Hong Kong because of the unique history of Hong Kong in the last 2 centuries. How do the buildings look different, and how does that affect the roof? Guangfu people like to use 三間兩廊, okay, which is the free base 2 arcade layout. What does it mean? Okay, that means a free base 2 arcade. What do you mean by 兩廊? You look at this plan. That is the courtyard, and these are 2 colonnades on the 2 sides of the courtyard. But you can see the colonnades, the long, are always of a lower order than the main halls. Okay, symbolically. Okay, because they are just for passageways. Sometimes they are for servants living. Sometimes they are for storage. And then the colonnades are always lower. The ridge of the colonnade is always lower than the eaves of the main hall. What does that mean? That means the roofs do not clash. You do not need the clashing of the roof. Okay, which is very clever. It makes construction much easier. So you have a continuous eaves, which is good. The Guangfu people like to see the eaves beautifully. Right? Like to see the beautifully. If you cut across that, it would be less beautiful, right? So eaves, and the eaves go beautifully, continuously. The longest the eave you have, the more rich you have. So they don't like to cut it. Okay, that's why it's 三間兩廊. Hakka people believes very strongly in feng shui, and there's a concept called 四水歸堂, 4-side water going into the courtyard. Okay, which is a feng shui idea, which means all the water, money or fortunes, come into the center. Okay, that means that the 4 sides more or less all come together and they clash. That means that they have all these valley gutters. It would have been alright in northern, in Jiangxi Rock province, which hardly any rain. Last time I went there, it never rain. Or northern Guangdong province, which is a lot of drizzle. Okay, where our water come from, Dongong, Eastern River comes from. Always drizzle, but never heavy rain. That is why this kind of roof would work. Okay, collecting the water all year round, because it's up high on the mountains, humid, always misty. It would work. But in black rain of Hong Kong, come on. Okay, Chiljiao, they believe in yin and yang, and for temples they would have a concept called free halls in shadow layout. Okay, which means the free halls, the free buildings are always in a row like that, which means there is a valley in the between. Okay, Chiljiao is always also very rainy. How would they invent something like that? Because they want to collect the water, so they will always build a very deep valley in between the 2 hills and collect the water. So if it is pure Chiljiao people who build this one, they will build it very carefully. But if you're not careful, you don't know about it and try to repair it and repair it wrongly, that is exactly where it leaks. Okay? So again, I'll run through these 5 principles of Lingnan roof. First is that it has got to shed water, not stick to the tiles together, not fully sealed. Anti-moisture, you must always have ventilation in between the gaps. You must always hook the roofs together, otherwise it will blow away. It will need, you don't bend it together, you let the heat disperse, easily maintained. Okay, so these are a lot of these roofs. So I've already explained this one. Okay, I won't go through that again. For Guangfu roof, what they do is that I've already explained it with penthouse and row tiles and cover it, and with packs, traditional packs like what I have here, which is a good way of preventing the typhoon. Okay, just pack them. Okay, should be okay. Most of them would do plain Wuyin tiles. Have what is Wuyin? Wuyin is the tar you obtain from the bottom of the Chinese wok. Chinese wok is always black, so they scrape the bottom of the Chinese wok to get this tar. Why do they do it? Because it's oily and it is water repellent. So they mix it together with lime water and become something like that. Okay, and sometimes they use glaze tiles. Hakka tiles, I would have to explain. Where are they? Where am I? Oh, these are Hakka tiles. Nope, these are not Hakka tiles. I've got enough packet. These. Hakka tiles go something like that. Where are my tiles? Okay. So instead of like the Guangfu people using row tiles, Hakka people use Hakka tiles, which are smaller tiles, something like that. Same make, slightly barrel, but in a reverse way. Okay, so they would do something like that. Okay, to cover it like that, and at the end they use mortar to stick it together. That's mortar, right? And then cover it like that. And that ensures all the water from here goes to the sideway onto these penthouse and go out. Okay, that's how they do it. Strangely, they don't use any packs, they don't use any mortar. Would they get blown away by wind? Yes, in exceedingly heavy typhoon they would. But Hakka people, if they were in northern Guangdong, they will wind, but not as serious as in the coastal area. So they're quite alright. Transported to Hong Kong, do they have problem? Yes, they do, in very heavy. But most of the case, they don't. How do they improve it? By sheer weight. The more closely packed these things are, the heavier the weight they are, better the waterproofing. So you can judge the quality of build by looking at how these things closely packed together. Okay, are they always built like that? Probably not, because you would have past restorations by sometimes not very good builders who would save money by taking away a tile every 2 times. This is easy. You don't notice it by eye, but it will leak. Okay, so for Hakka tiles, it is important to get an honest builder. But back in those days, Hakka people employ the next door Hakka people. So you cannot be not honest, otherwise they will beat you up, right? Okay. So in the traditional world, they would use good quality and always use highly packed tiles. But nowadays, if you do a specification and you do not specify the compactness of it, you will have some contractor cheating you out and leaving some out, and you will never visually notice it, and that would have problem. Okay? So that is another reason why do people in the past do it right, but I can't do it right? It's because you have to understand how they did it. Okay? The way to do the gutter, valley gutter, as I said, valley gutter at 45 degrees is very difficult for ground-floor tiles because you can never cut a penthouse 45 degrees. But how the Hakka people do it? They do it because they have this edge, which this is called lime and stopper. We call it gai zoi, okay, which literally translates to chicken beak because it looks like one. So this one, they use it to cut at a 45 degrees angle. Traditionally, they use the penthouse to lay it. Better ones have 2 layers of penthouse doing it, okay, and mortar it. Nowadays, we would cheat and put a lead flashing in between, right? Okay, so, and we sometimes even use modern waterproofing to do it because nowadays, most of the time, I can't trust the workmanship of some of these workers, so I might as well use a modern material to replace the uncertainty. Qiuzhou architecture, obviously, you never look at the tiles, will you? You always look at the bridge, okay? Because they're too beautiful, okay? This is called fragmentic ceramics, hamqi. Okay, it is Heman, you must know, it's very famous in Fujian and province and Taiwan. These sort of things, but the Fujian people, the Minnan people, and Qiuzhou people would use fragmentic ceramics to build these things. But today's topic is not about that. It's about the East House. In Hong Kong, because most of them are the Qiuzhou buildings and Hailufeng buildings are mostly temples, so they would use glazed tiles. Glazed tiles are something that look like that. They don't glaze the whole thing, they only glaze part of it. So once you overlap it, you still see the glazed part, but it doesn't matter. How is it done? The glazed tiles do something like that, and I can do it like that. Okay, so these are called the drip tiles. Do something like that. Drip tiles do something like that, and the cap tiles just cover over it. Okay, that's how another one would do something like that, and then the next one would, okay. Okay. So on and so forth. Sometimes we would have jinbin, cutting edge, which means that only the edge tiles will be glazed, so you see a shimmering edge, but the rest will be plain. But sometimes they would use a whole glazed ones. So this scholars believe that the drip tiles and cap tiles were invented around the Ming Dynasty, which means the 15th century when the glazing techniques improved. So it helps the water to drip, and it also gives a decorative face facing in front. You know, if just that face facing you, it's very difficult to decorate it. But if you imagine you have that sort of things, you can really decorate it to a lot of patterns. And a lot of them, as I said, the Qiuzhou building always very important, the internal gutters. So the waterproofing of that is very important. I can remember the Chinese name as 三座落陰叫做 three holes continuous in a shadow. Yam means in shadow. That means that when you walk along the central axis, Guangfu building, you walk across, or Hakka building, you walk across a bay, you have central courtyard. Walk across another hall, you have central courtyard. Qiuzhou buildings don't do something like that. You walk across in the middle, it's all in shadow, and the light wells are on both sides. Okay, that is called 三座落陰. That is why they have gutters in between. Okay, for restorations, we need to deal with the glazed tiles. We need to roof tiles, we need to deal with the truss, we need to deal with the line mortar, we need to go the building, which today I'm not going to go into that in depth. We also need to deal with how to wash the tiles, how to use traditional bamboo packs, how to put tonal over it. That was your question. Do we treat timber? Yes, we treat them by tonal. Okay? And lime plaster decorations, and we choose our tiles carefully. Modern ways, how do we deal with this? Ground floor buildings. These are some of the things that we saw. So this photo is given to me by Betty. Some of what she sees in traditional ones, people would put waterproofing just in between the gaps, and we have bamboo strips to strengthen it. So what we do is usually have a mock-up to test the particular style, particular construction is workable in this one. Also to test the craftsmanship of the workers that we employ. We would use pads. We would use copper wires to hook them together, hook the tiles together. Some modern ones, we would use modern stainless steel hooks to hook the because the tiles, because the shape they are, it is very convenient just to put a gap and hook onto it, and it holds it together. It doesn't need to everyone because they all overlap. You hook it, every individual one, the whole thing will hold together. Okay. And the HKA ones, as I said, important to waterproof this one. I don't quite worry about these middle ones as long as you have a good contractor who don't cheat you on the number of tiles. As long as you have sufficient number of tiles, it doesn't leak. This one is the worry. So how does this edges do? Traditionally, you put pen tiles. They will put 2 layers of pen tiles. But nowadays, very often I would cheat and put a lamp flashing in between, just that I don't trust the workmanship. 三座錄音, the Chuzhou buildings, the most problematic area is the gutter in the middle. So this one, traditionally they would use a very big piece of stone and carve it to make sure the waterproofing is never made of wood. Okay. To do this one, and nowadays very often, again, I don't trust them. I would use modern waterproofing to apply onto it. Okay, and again, there are other cases. This is the case of Mallory Street, which the project I did, which is a Chinese roof with a vernacular Chinese roof, just that it is a tonglao. What I did is that I put stainless steel structure in between, and modern waterproofing, modern thermal insulation. As far as I know, it is the first time ever in the world that a Chinese roof complies with the modern building regulation. So it is a conclusion that we have to learn all these things because different roofs represents not just the technique, but represent the aspiration, because they want their roof a particular shape because of different culture, because of a different idea, and they end up differently, and traditionally they have different construction, and we have to understand the different constructions. A single specification will never work. You have to understand how that particular roof is done or neighborhood is done, how it's traditionally done, and repairing it like with like is not going to be your answer. You have to improve it, but in order to improve it, you've got to understand it first, and then you integrate it with modern technology to do it. So that is hopefully, if we continue this kind of studies and do more practices of it, and conserve them and restore them, respecting their traditional craftsmanship, we can sustain the traditional cultures of the vernacular people and vernacular architecture. Thank you, everyone. Okay.
Okay, so thank you, Edward, for having such a comprehensive sharing of Chinese roof. And I understand we have overrun a little bit, but I did think possibly people around here may have some questions. So maybe we can have 3 questions from below and see if you have any questions to Edward. So you may ask him now. Anyone from Great.
Sorry, just a very quick one. It seems to me that from what you've said, it makes quite a difference in understanding the geography of the place. I mean, the climate, the local climate of the place. You introduced an arts and crafts building in Hong Kong, didn't work very well. On the other hand, the classical colonial style building, maybe by default, actually seems to be quite successful.
Yeah.
Just a quick observation.
As I said, as I come to find out, there's no single answer, and I usually, as I said, I do not look at buildings by simply looking at styles, not looking, what is the style, what do I do? Instead, I look at why was it built something like that, what circumstances it make like that, and as you rightly pointed out, if someone builds a church, then everything is not important. He would want a pitch roof on the outside and a pitch roof on the inside. Okay, that's a must. So how would they do it, and what's our engineering problem? If for the art and craft movement, I've studied a bit. All of them are small buildings that belongs to a small group of middle class Westerners, because they, mostly Scottish or Wales, that they want to recall the English country life. Why would anybody build an art and craft movement building in Hong Kong unless that group of people very much long for the English country life? Okay, and that is where it comes from. So how do I restore this building to give that flavor? That's where I look at it, instead of just this style do this style do that. I never work that way.
Any more questions? Maybe I have one question for you, Edward, actually. I understand maybe most of the clients come to you when they ask you how to help them to do the Chinese roofing. And as you just mentioned, there's so many different styles of layering the tiles in the roof. How do you normally advise the clients, or how do you normally approach to the craftsman, which is difficult to find in Hong Kong possibly, to repair those roofs? How do you come back to these clients and make your advice?
Dealing with clients, as I see it, is gaining their trust. I mean, Anthony once said that when you present to a client, you don't present your skill, you present yourself. That's what Anthony says. So when you gain enough trust of your client, of course you need to be confident of your work, and if you can convey that sort of confidence to the client, then he would tend to agree with the things you do. But that aside, we still need to do a good job of it, and sometimes you're right, we need to convince the client of a particular way that he's unfamiliar with. Okay, he may think that repairing a roof is easy and you just get a contractor to do this. And to convince him you need extra expenses and extra effort to do it is not easy. But you can approach it from another angle, tell him how great the architecture is. When we were first approached by the client of current bowling club, they were just thinking of repairing the roof. Simple, tiles, everyone can do it. But after research, I presented to them a picture of, not a real picture, but a vision of why their building is different. It's because of a particular aspiration of their forefathers of building an art and craft movement building in Hong Kong. Why would anybody do that? It's a silly thing to do. But if you have your forefather have a particular vision to bring back the English country style into here, that's the reason why they do it. And there's a particular requirement to do it in this particular way, and that is why you need to invest a little bit more in bringing back that sort of glory. Mm-hmm. So understanding the architecture and understanding the background and understanding why the builder built in a particular way, understanding why the original client 100 years ago wanted this style is important to convey to a client. And for the craftsman, again, you need to tell the craftsman why it's different. So I always tend to tell the story of how we repair Chingshan Monastery. First of all, we try to tell them, take care of the brickwork, take care of the brickwork, do this, do this, do that. They don't listen. And after a while, my wife went up and tried to clean the bricks herself. And next week, we come to the site, we find some workers using toothbrush to do it. I said, I never asked you to use a toothbrush. And the worker said, oh, this brick is very important, historical importance, so I can't brush it. I have to find some way. I find toothbrush is good. It is gentle and it cleans it off. It takes longer, more hard work, but it takes care of the brickwork. I wouldn't instruct him to do that, but he wanted to do it. But so conservation is not here. Conservation is here. So if you can convince your client and convince your craftsman to do it here, he will do it. You don't need the specification.
Okay. Interesting to know. Any other questions? Actually, we have a souvenir to Edward to thank him for coming tonight. And maybe I can invite Stephen, the Board of External Affairs, to give him a present. Yes.
Here? Okay. This one is good. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.